Hello, it's Prachi, the clown, back on YouTube. So basically, I was in the middle of editing my final thoughts and reflections on my no-buy year, and then I accidentally deleted a bunch of the files, like the raw, legit video files on my SD card that I was editing down, and so now I have to refilm that entire video. I am hella frustrated with myself. I'm also hella frustrated with whatever this corner of my desk is. Specifically, this little organizer thing up top, which contains all of my eyeshadow palettes and blushes. And since everything feels like it's a little bit out of control, I have decided I'm at the very least going to get that little aspect of my life under control. I'm going to go through everything there, I'm going to declutter it, reorganize it, have it look not like the mess that it looks like right now. And so I need to figure out how to organize everything in a way that doesn't make me want to die when I look at it. So, without any further ado, let's get it. Let me clear all the stuff that isn't makeup out from here. Like, there's like bookmarks and random little postcards and stuff. Sorry, it's like a bunch of friends have been like sending me little like knickknacks and stuff throughout my birthday. Like all these really cute little like stickers and postcards and stuff, and I've just kind of not had the time, space, or energy to deal with them. So I just stuffed them in here. Oh, there's also some earrings here. I think maybe I should deal with the blushes first because that's like a very, very quick update slash declutter. Okay, so the relatively newer blush acquisitions, the ones that I like didn't really have a sense for, are these 4 blushes. So these 2 cloud paints in Storm and Dawn, they were gifts from a friend during my birthday in January. And I've only just started to play around with them, with this berry tone one in particular, and it's been working great. I've really liked it the few times I've used it. I've been carefully monitoring to check if it breaks me out or not or causes clogged pores. So far, we are all good. Touch wood. So these are both staying for now. These were the other 2 blushes that I didn't really have a sense about. Every other blush that you're seeing here, from the Shiseido down through these MAC blushes to this NARS one here, I went over them in detail in my blush declutter video, so if you want to hear about all of my feelings, I have linked that video up in the cards. Feel free to go watch it there. At the time that I filmed that video, these 2 were relatively new blushes in my life. So this was another gift from a friend, and at the time that I filmed that first blush video, I hadn't really used it. This is what the blush looks like now. So you can see that it's definitely been used, and I'm at the stage where I can now properly give an opinion on this. If you're gonna ask me whether this is worth the exorbitant amount of money that a YSL blush is, I can definitively say that this is not. First of all, this is a very, very tiny blush. Like, I know it looks really like big and luxurious from the outside, but when you open it, more than half of it is taken up by this like really dinky brush. The reason why it's so worn away in the center right there is because, as it turns out, this blush is incredibly tightly packed into the compact. So much so that it was really, really difficult to get any sort of color or pigment or product to even pick up on a brush. I had to sort of almost really dig in and scrape off the top layer of the blush before I began starting to see any color. Considering how expensive this blush is, it should not be doing that. This is a beautiful color. It's nothing extraordinary. It's actually very, very similar to Melba by MAC, which I also own, but Melba's completely matte, whereas this is a slight sheen. It's nice. Once I actually got the color to start showing up on my cheeks, I liked it. And when I hold it in my hands, it does spark joy because of the friend who gave it to me, because of the story behind why she bought this blush for me, and because, yeah, this is actually a nice, well-performing blush. However, you would literally never, ever, ever be able to convince me to buy this for myself once it's over. You would actually never be able to convince me to buy any sort of YSL blush, period. I can say with 100% certainty this is not better than any of the other blushes I own, and my desire to even experience luxury blushes has been completely killed. So I'm keeping it with joy because the story behind this blush makes it special, makes me happy, but the blush itself, she's middling. God, I talked for like 15 years about that blush. and I said this would be brief. What a scam. So this is the 3CE Take a Layer Multipot in Cabbage Rose. This was decluttered to me by a friend who had gone to East Asia and bought a whole bunch of cosmetics. I used this a couple of times whenever I was feeling a hankering for a berry tone blush. It's a very, very dry formulation. Even though it's technically a cream, even as I put my hand into it and rub it around, there is this sort of weird powdery matte feeling to it. I was just not a fan. I was just really kind of like forcing myself to use it because I didn't really have any other options. The thing is, I so sort of disliked using it and didn't really enjoy the look that it gave on my cheeks that well before I got this Glossier blush, I stopped using this to satisfy my craving for a berry tone blush, and I instead started using my berry tone lipsticks. The fact that I did that, I think, speaks for itself. So I'm actually going to declutter this. The other blush that I have decided to declutter is this one. So this is the Stila Convertible color in the shade Camellia. It was featured quite heavily in my March favorites of last year. I've had this blush for a really long time. It's also one of the only blushes that has pan. You can see that I've used this blush like crazy. I have loved it to bits and pieces, but this is a cream product that's technically only supposed to be used for 6 months, and I've had it for something like 2 years now, and its age is really showing. It's gunky. It also smells just slightly off. Previously, it had like what I would consider to be a very neutral smell, almost like a non-smell, and now there is a very distinctly sort of oily, plasticky scent to it. So I think it's time to give up the ghost. I think I need to call it. Time of death, March 5th, 2020, 3:54 p.m. So, amongst all of my blushes, these two are getting decluttered, the rest are staying. Let me just rearrange them back into this thingy. The way that all of that fits here, love it. Alrighty folks, it's eyeshadow palette reckoning time. Okay, so there's one palette that's no longer here that I literally decluttered this morning because I sent a package to my friend Ami, who lives in Singapore. So that eyeshadow palette, let me insert a photo of it here, is the Urban Decay Jean-Michel Basquiat palette in the shade Golden Griot. And it has a whole bunch of really nice warm tone colors, but also a bunch of cool tone colors. And I don't really mess with cool tone colors that much, but Ami loves a good smoky eye. She also loves Jean-Michel Basquiat. So I felt like that was the perfect thing to give her as like an additional little present, especially because I myself have only really used that Basquiat palette like 4 or 5 times. It was one of those things that I bought because the packaging was beautiful. And I used to do this so frequently before I went on my no-buy year. I would constantly buy makeup that I knew I would never use, or which wasn't my style, or which I knew that I had dupes for in my collection, purely because they came out in a collaboration and I was excited about the piece of popular culture that was being honored in the collaboration. I bought that palette purely because I liked Jean-Michel Basquiat. So that guy is gone. It's on its way to Singapore as we speak on some boat, taking a solid 6 to 8 weeks to get there. And my only hope is that Ami, who loves Jean-Michel Basquiat and is super excited to expand her eyeshadow horizons, will really, really enjoy it. So to start off, we have 12 little eyeshadow palettes or quads. I'm going to try and KonMari my way through this. So the KonMari method dictates that you hold each object in your hand, see whether it sparks joy or not. If it sparks joy, you keep it. Otherwise, you let it go with gratitude. Now, if you have trouble like deciding whether something sparks joy or not, or you're not sure what joy feels like or whatever, an exercise Marie Kondo has people do is, so if, for example, you have a pile of like 30 shirts in front of you, Marie Kondo will have her clients do one of 2 things. She'll either have them find their absolute favorite shirt and then hold it and see what that makes them feel like, or she'll have them pick 10 random shirts out of a pile and then rank just those 10 things from favorite to least favorite. And often that process of ranking is really, really illustrative of a person's preferences, tastes, what things they like and dislike, which things spark more joy than others, etc., etc. So looking at this, the thing I first want to grab, the thing that I would probably rank my #1 palette out of all of these, is this guy right here. So this is the palette of single eyeshadows I have collected over the years. The vast majority of them, actually all of them I think, are from MAC Cosmetics. And because I've collected them over years, like literally just acquiring like 1 or 2 eyeshadows at a time, each one is very, very carefully considered. I know exactly why I got it and what role it plays in my life. Now, at some point later on, I'm going to do a KonMari declutter of all of my single eyeshadows, loose pigments, etc, etc. At that point in time, I think I will actually go through and individually assess every single pan in this, but for now I'm just going to leave this as one object whole intact. And holding it in my hand right now, like, I can tell you this gives me an immense amount of joy. If I could only keep one thing from this entire set, this would be it. Of all of them, this is my ranked #1. So I'm going to put this specific palette filled with the vast majority of my MAC single eyeshadows here. The next thing that I actually want to grab, my instinct for what my #2 item is this. So this is the Smashbox Covershot palette in the shade Ablaze. It has a very, very similar color scheme to the Anastasia Modern Renaissance, but in my opinion, for me and my purposes, my skin tone, what I like out of eyeshadows, I much prefer this to the Anastasia Modern Renaissance. First of all, the shimmery eyeshadows in here are much more useful to me than the shimmery eyeshadows in the Anastasia Modern Renaissance. I find that Vermeer and Primavera, those two sort of like champagne colored shimmers, they are just icy garbage on my skin. Whereas this sort of gold champagne color is a much more flattering neutral shade on my skin. I also really appreciate the inclusion of like a shimmery pink rose gold mauve color and a shimmery orange. I also like how small and compact this is. Like, this is smaller than my hand. The packaging is really like nice. I like that little effect. I like that it's not velvet like the Modern Renaissance and I don't have to clean it off. And just overall, this is such a workhorse palette for me. This gets pretty close to actually being a perfect everyday palette for me. So this is my #2 and it's definitely staying. #3, I think oddly enough, is going to be this quad. So this is the Chanel eyeshadow quad in Candeur et Expérience. In my head, there is this like fantasy version of myself, and she has already gotten into and graduated law school, and she works for like Global Affairs Canada or maybe the United Nations or the World Bank or some other big international organization, or maybe she works for a really big law firm or a legal consulting firm, and she is just a high-powered business lady who takes no shit from anybody. And her signature look is either like a really, really bold lip or a very bomb brown toned, warm, smoky eye. And so the fantasy version of me, she rocks the hell out of this eyeshadow quad, because that fantasy version of me, she doesn't own all of this makeup. That fantasy version of me is something of a minimalist, and she only owns very few, very high quality pieces of makeup that she wears all the time to death. And here's the thing, I talked about this a bunch in my No Buy Year wrap-up video, which I'm sadly going to have to reshoot now, but my relationship with my fantasy self has really, really changed throughout my No Buy Year. I don't purchase things because of my fantasy self anymore. However, I don't know if it's the fact that it's Chanel, I don't know if it's the fact that I envision this as being part of the thing that fantasy future lawyer me would wear, or if it's the fact that I bought this eyeshadow quad after a really particularly difficult exam season that I had undergone, where I had also simultaneously decided for the first time in my life I was going to be a lawyer. There was just like, there was a lot going on when I bought this, and I have bestowed on this eyeshadow quad a whole bunch of meaning. And while it's true that the No Buy Year means that I no longer assign that sort of meaning to cosmetics, I'm more acutely aware now than ever that the way to achieve my fantasy self is not by buying stuff, the damage is sort of already done with this eyeshadow quad, which is to say that this eyeshadow quad does have some sort of like weird psychological placebo effect on me. Whenever I have like a presentation to give in class, or I have an exam I'm not feeling particularly good about, or I'm just like in a situation where I feel like I need more confidence, I need to be a more put together, badass version of myself, I always reach for this eyeshadow quad. And like, placebo of all placebos, the shit works. I put it on and I do immediately feel like a calmer, better, more collected, badass version of myself. It's like, because I have imbued this eyeshadow quad with so much meaning, because I have tied it so inextricably with the fantasy version of myself who has her life together, it's like every time I wear this, I am somehow able to channel that fantasy version of myself in real time. Like, I'm able to bring a little bit of her grace and poise and badassery into the present real me. Does that make sense? Am I crazy? I feel like I'm crazy. I feel like everyone's like watching this and they're like, it's not that deep, sis. It's not that deep. And I know, trust me, I know it is absolutely not that deep. My year has completely disabused me of the notion that this or any other piece of makeup would actually turn me into the badass boss lady lawyer that I want to be. And yet, like, I cannot deny the power that certain pieces of makeup like this, or some of the red lipsticks that I own, or some of the berry tone lips, or even some of the perfumes that I own, I can't deny that they do actually have an effect on my mood, my self-confidence, my way of being. And when I hold this in my hand, I do feel like an intense spark of joy. This is so precious to me, and so I'm gonna keep it. It's my number 3. Okay, I feel like I spent like 1,000 years talking about that. Let me speed up a little bit. Looking at the palettes here, I would say palette number 4 is probably this. So this is the Bad Habit Supernova palette. You pretty much can't get it anymore. So this is supposed to be pretty similar in color story to the Natasha Denona Lila palette. As you can tell, it's not exactly the same. Like, I think the Lila palette has what is functionally almost like a magenta hot pink, and this palette absolutely doesn't have that. But it sort of follows a very, very similar color story, and the quality of these eyeshadows is actually really, really good. One of the reasons why I really like this palette is because, and this is a thing that's always sort of difficult to capture on camera, but a lot of these shimmery colors have a sort of richness, depth, slight duochrome quality to them, where although they look kind of like flat on camera or even in the pan, this one especially, like, this just looks like it would be like a gross brown color, but it's actually this reddish color right here. It's a duochrome. It's like a red with like a greenish brown shift. And I personally am a really, really big fan of when an eyeshadow has enough sort of depth and complexity and duochrominess, for lack of a better word, that I can just wear that one singular color smudged all over my lid and to have it still have dimension. And I find that a lot of these shimmery colors allow me to do that. I also really like these sort of like reddish, burgundy, mauve, slightly orangey eyeshadows. There's like 3 colors here that I never use. This really sort of icy pinkish color and these 2 cool tone mattes, but every other color in here is a banger. Love it, use it to death. I just genuinely enjoy this palette so much. I'm so glad I was able to get it before it got discontinued. Looking at the rest of these palettes here, I think the next one that I want to gravitate towards is this. So this is the Alter Ego Goddess palette, and this was actually a gift to me during my Novi year from Hannah Louise Poston. I discussed the story of how she gave this to me in my summer favorites video, and even though I got this palette in July, I actually really didn't start using it until December. During the holiday season is when I busted out this palette because it has this sort of like gold and green color scheme, and I just fell in love. I love these sort of matte mustardy colors. Even though the greens look kind of like weird and intimidating, you can literally just block them and you end up having this really beautiful, functional, pretty, shimmery, neutral gold palette, which for my undertones, my like weird olivey golden undertones, this was perfect. I wore this all throughout December, throughout a huge chunk of January, and I wore it for like everyday looks, for more dramatic looks involving the like greens, even some like matte mustard colored looks. I just had a really good time with this eyeshadow palette. Like, this is a great neutral eyeshadow palette for me and my taste and what I'm used to. It's like the ideal everyday palette for me, plus these two really fun pops of green. There is this like one really icy white color, which like literally I have never used a day in my life, but aside from that, I've generally really enjoyed like every single color in here. Also, and this is like a minor thing, but again, if we're talking about things that like spark joy, I think minor things also matter. I love the eyeshadow names. I am a sucker for Greek and Roman mythology and figures in Greek and Roman mythology, so having eyeshadows called things like Artemis, Hera, Valkyrie, Venus, Luna, Freya, Cassandra, like Pandora, I love that. And that's just like an extra bit of flair that when I hold this, it contributes to the spark joy feeling. Because not only do I love the color story, but there's a specialness behind how I got it, like it was a gift from Hannah, and I even really enjoy the theme and the names. So this is a very, very strong number 5. And in fact, I would argue that these two are almost tied for 4th place, than this being firmly behind this guy. Because the color stories for these two are just so completely different. But I love them both a lot, and I use them like crazy. So let me actually put them both as a tied 4th place. Okay, so the next palette that I instinctively want to pick up is this one. So this is the Urban Decay Moondust palette, and it was decluttered to me by a friend who moved to grad school. You know, I tried to wipe this down before I got on camera. Either way, my friend bought it because the eyeshadows looked really glittery and pretty in the pan, but she never actually ended up using it because she doesn't like working with glitters. And because I personally don't mind working with glitters, like I have a bunch of glitter glues, I like working with them wet, my friend just gave me her palette over the summer. I actually used this color, which might be looking white on camera, but it's actually like an iridescent pinky color. I've actually enjoyed playing with this a lot throughout February. I especially love the top row. I haven't actually played that much with these sort of cooler tones down here, but that's because I don't really wear cool tone shadows all that much. However, the 4 shadows that I have used quite a bit in the top row, I love a lot. Putting just one of these super glittery colors all over my lid and then like a brown in the crease, I find is just a great way to elevate what would otherwise be a very, very plain look. Also, I have loved using this green as a glittery eyeliner, and that's probably how I'm going to end up using these blues as well. I love it a lot. I love this formula a lot. It's definitely not for everyone, but I live my best life every single time I wear this. So it's a strong number 5, and it's definitely staying. The next one that I most gravitate towards is this Colourpop palette in these mauvey shades. This is the Give It To Me Straight palette, and I'm actually really surprised at how much I like these 3 shimmers up here. In my day-to-day life, I'm what I would call a very basic bitch. I just like to put one shimmery color all over my lid and then one matte color in my crease and call it a day. Oftentimes the matte color in my crease isn't even an eyeshadow. It's usually just like my bronzer or sometimes my blush. So whenever it comes to like an eyeshadow palette, I tend to focus a lot more on the shimmery colors than the mattes. But I really like these 3 eyeshadows a lot, and I actually tended to gravitate towards this palette quite frequently during the winter months. So especially during November and December, because I was wearing a whole lot of berry toned lips, this sort of mauve color palette ended up being a perfect complement to berry toned lips. I know to some extent that you can kind of depot these Colourpop palettes, and in a dream world, I really only care about these 3 shades and then this really interesting sort of dusty mauve color right here. The rest I could kind of like take it or leave it, but I don't hate it. And holding this in my hand, I feel a lot more positive feelings than I do negative feelings. This is still overwhelmingly in the joy category and not in the eh or ugh category. So this is palette number 6, and it's gonna stay. The one that I next want to gravitate towards is this little quad here. So this is a Shiseido eyeshadow quad in the shade Jizoh Street Reds. And it basically contains 2 matte shades and 2 shimmery shades. So the 2 matte shades are this red and this really dark brown, and then the 2 shimmery shades are this sort of light pink shot through with a little bit of gold, and this really sort of pretty marigold color. This is one of those eyeshadow palettes that I will admit, point blank, I impulse bought it. But then I actually forced myself to use this palette, and turns out this very nondescript palette of 4 colors, it's kind of a badass, because I remember using this palette for like 2 weeks straight and constructing just a whole bunch of different looks out of this. Here's the like weird thing about me. I think sometimes when I see a palette with like 9 or 12 shades, I get a little bit overwhelmed and I'm not really sure what to do. Whereas when I'm presented with very few colors, it's like my brain sort of gets this like weird kickstart into trying to be creative because I have so few limited options. And so weirdly, like the 2 weeks that I ended up using this, I was a lot more experimental with my looks. And when it just kind of sits here amongst all of these other like quads and mini palettes and stuff, I tend not to reach for it because it looks so much more nondescript than this. But every single time I do actually pick it up and put it in my bag to use for the week, I have a grand old time. I really enjoy how creative I suddenly become when faced with only 4 eyeshadows. I like how sleek and compact it is. This is so easy for me to slip in my makeup bag, and because I'm a person who I so frequently do my makeup on the go, like I do it on a train, I've realized that this provides a high degree of functionality for me, and I love it for that. So this is number 7. The next one that I want to pick up is this. This is the Colourpop Yes Please palette. It's basically Colourpop's version of the Natasha Denona Sunset palette color story. And here's the thing. The main attraction for me is the yellow. If this palette didn't have the yellow, I would probably get rid of it in a heartbeat. And here's the thing. This yellow eyeshadow, it's not even that good. I have to work so hard to get this yellow eyeshadow to show up on my skin. I have to use like a really, really light colored base. I have to make sure I don't blend and that I like very carefully pat it on. Those of you who saw my video on like ADHD and burnout and therapy where I was using this yellow eyeshadow, you saw how careful I had to be to get it to show up on my skin. It's like genuinely not even that good of a yellow eyeshadow, but it is the only one I have. And so for now, just for now, until I get a better yellow eyeshadow, I'm going to keep this palette. So that's eyeshadow palette number 8. These 3 things that are left here, I would rank even lower than this Colourpop Yes Please palette, so I am going to declutter them. So let's run through them really quickly. So this is the Wet n Wild Rosé in the Air palette. As you can see, it's a very, very familiar color story. It's actually, color-wise, almost an exact dupe for the modern Renaissance. And therein sort of lies the problem, because if you remember from a million years ago when I was talking about this Smashbox Covershot Ablaze palette and how I much preferred its rendition of the modern Renaissance color story to the actual modern Renaissance palette, this really closely adheres to the color story of the actual modern Renaissance palette. And so these 2 colors are just too light for my skin, and this lilac, it's slightly too purple to where whenever I use it on my eyes, it just looks like I haven't slept enough. It's very much so zombie tease. It's not a great look. And so Maria Kondo style, I'm going to let this go with gratitude, because this palette taught me that I don't need the modern Renaissance palette. It basically killed any and all desire I had to own the actual modern Renaissance palette, as iconic of a palette as that is, because it made me realize that a bunch of those colors just really don't work for me. So next up, let's discuss this. So this is actually something that I found when I was moving, and I totally forgot that I owned it. So this is a little quad from the Korean beauty brand Etude House. This is their blend for 4 eyes, and it's in the shade 01 Dried Rose. So here's the thing, and not to be like generalizing, but when it comes to Korea and the Korean beauty market's eyeshadow game, it's not necessarily weak or strong so much as it is inconsistent. At the same time that like matte satin and frosty eyeshadows are terrible in K-beauty, Korea excels in beautiful, glittery, duochrome, multi-dimensional eyeshadows, none of which are present in this quad. This quad just has 2 middling matte eyeshadows, a half-ass satin eyeshadow, and then one sort of like frosty metallic color. I own all of these colors at least 10 times over in formulas I much prefer. This was a very stupid impulse purchase that I just made when I was having a really bad day, and I have more than learned my lesson from it, so I'm going to let this go. Lastly, we have this MAC eyeshadow quad containing 2 MAC single eyeshadows. So the shade to the left is Vex, the shade to the right is Motif. The camera is absolutely horrid at capturing this, but both of these are actually duochrome eyeshadows. I don't particularly enjoy using either of these eyeshadows as actual eyeshadows. I took these back from my sister during my no-buy year because 1, she wasn't using them, and 2, I wanted to try more interesting duochrome highlight colors. But I've literally never even felt the urge to use them once since I got them back. I think I wanted to be the kind of funky, weird person who wears like interesting silvery blue shifting pink highlights, and what I've come to realize is that that's just not me. Sometimes the idea of a thing is a lot more appealing than the thing itself, and I acquired these to try and live up to the idea, but the reality is I don't use it ever. I've learned my lesson and I can let these go with gratitude. Alright, so this is the final showdown of my palettes. Now that I've given it a little bit more thought, had a little bit more time to percolate, I've realized I actually don't even want to really keep this. Just keeping this for the yellow eyeshadow seems kind of ridiculous when right now I'm neither in the mood nor the season to even attempt to wear yellow eyeshadow. I have on my wish list like a yellow eyeshadow single I'm already thinking about that doesn't cost a whole lot, and I know I'm probably not even going to buy it until we hit more summery weather than just now. So I'm comfortable just letting this go. I don't want it just sitting in my space for a whole bunch of months when I know I'm not even really going to use the yellow eyeshadow for a really long time. And so I think I'm just going to let go of all 4 of these and keep these 8. If we keep in mind that I also gave away another eyeshadow palette this morning, that means I actually got rid of a bit over a third of my palette collection. And I'm okay with that. I feel good. I feel like I have more than enough with these 8 that remain. Folks, my camera ran out of battery and I have to leave for class in like 5 minutes, so I don't have time to charge it and use the official setup. We're just using my phone. The fact that I have decluttered down to the point where all of my blushes actually very neatly fit into one spot, that is big sexy, y'all. This feels so much better. This feels like I have space. This feels like I have room to breathe. It doesn't feel cramped and overstuffed. Everything has a home. I know exactly where everything should be in here, and that's really nice. I will be back to uploading videos every single week, by the way, because I've actually taken the last couple of days to film a whole bunch of videos. So not just my no-buy-year wrap-up, but also some empties, a set of favorites, and what my project is going to be moving forward now that I'm no longer on my no-buy-year. Because just in case anybody thought I was just like buying stuff willy-nilly, no, I'm not doing that. So expect those videos to be going up soon. Everything except for my no-buy-year wrap-up has actually already been shot. So I'm back in business, lads. And I'm truly gonna leave because I have class now. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, I hope you have a great upcoming week. And even if the rest of your week ends up becoming messy or imperfect, I hope that you're still able to create and experience some truly beautiful moments. Thanks for watching. Bye.